It's time!
All right. What's kicking, everybody? We're back for another episode of Pickin' Fights. That in and of itself, technical difficulties. I don't have Tom here with me today. Tom is the computer man. I'm here with Joe. Joe is a longtime friend of the program, recurring guest. He's been here a couple times now with us in the past, and I'm really excited to have him here. He filled in on shorter notice than Alexander Volkanovski, jumping in the hot seat. I do just want to say, before I ask Joe how he's doing, shout out to Tom. He's out there in Aruba right now. So like nothing's wrong. He's just having a great vacation right now. Wishing the best, safe travels. All right, Joe, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, man. Appreciate you guys having me. Appreciate Tom letting me on the program. Do my best to fill in for him today. We got a great card coming up, man. I think this is going to be one of the best fight nights of the year so far on paper. Obviously, we don't know how the fights are going to go until they happen, but I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this card quite a bit. There's something about these Saturday afternoon free ABC cards that I love so much because, we're not in college football season quite yet. We got another couple of weeks. I love Saturday afternoons watching college football and then tuning into the UFC at night. This is kind of like that in between where you could have your afternoon beers, hang out outside, maybe watching on like an outdoor TV somewhere, hang out inside, and just enjoy your afternoon and get a nice buzz on before you go out for the night. If that's your thing. If not, then you just get to watch the fights at a different time during the day. But yeah, I'm super pumped about this one. Also, I've met Corey Sandhagen headlining this card. Super nice guy. I'm hoping that being that I've met him and he was super cool, it doesn't affect it doesn't bias my picks at all today. But this one is taking place in Abu Dhabi. So expect the normal hijinks to take place over there. The normal weird judging, things like that. If certain fights do come to decisions, it's not entirely stacked with Arabian fighters or fighters from that Middle East, Africa, Russia region like it has been in the past. So it may not be too bad. It's a little bit more of a variation. I'm super pumped about this one. So why don't we kick it off as we always do with our prelim notables. All right. That's not the video. Tom knows how to put the video up. Horrible. I stink. We got one we want to start off with, and that is Rolando Bedoya versus Jai Herbert. What do you think about this one, Joe?
Yeah, we talked about this a little before we went live. This one's interesting. We both saw Bedoya debut, actually, at the Prudential Center. He fought Chaos Williams. It was a great fight. Wasn't the most entertaining fight in terms of, back and forth. There wasn't a war or anything like that, but it was a really close fight, and I didn't know who was going to get the nod at the end. Chaos ended up getting it by split decision. And then Bedoya went on to fight Song Kenan, which is another tough guy. I mean, 2 fights in the UFC, you get Chaos Williams and Song Kenan. It's 2 tough draws right there. So obviously the UFC sees something in him. He's coming down to lightweight from welterweight here, which is a big thing as well. He wasn't the biggest welterweight, and you look at Jai Herbert. Jai Herbert has the size on him here. They're going to come in weighing about the same. Bedoya might be a little heavier, but it's a tough fight for both of them. I think it's going to be really close. Bedoya hasn't really shown much grappling chops in the UFC so far, so I don't really see him going for it. But on the contrary, Jai Herbert, the last few fights, we've seen him go for takedowns when he needs to. He came in the UFC as primarily a striker. No offense, but the guys who come out of the UK and in England, they're not known for their wrestling, really. So it was a bit of a surprise to see him go to it. It's gotten him a couple wins here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him do it again. Who knows how Bedoya is going to handle this weight cut. First fight at a new weight class, you never really know with fighters, right? Jai Herbert has, good power in his hands. He's not the most defensively sound guy in the world. So, normally I would think these guys fighting would go to a decision, but with the lack of striking defense on Jai Herbert combined with his power, I could see a finish here, expecting a late finish. I think I'm going to pick Jai Herbert to win this one. I think he can get like a 3rd round KO here or, win like a greasy decision. I think this is going to be one of the closer fights on the card. And you mentioned the judging over here. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a 30-27 and a 29-28 opposite ways here. But give me Jai Herbert with a late finish here. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes all the way, but I think Jai Herbert has the power to crack here, especially with Bedoya coming down a weight class.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on Jai Herbert. I totally agree. The weight cut may affect Rolando Bedoya a little bit. Chin, cardio, whatnot. And Jai Herbert is experienced, has the game plan, the ability to take this fight wherever he needs it to go, and probably win by decision. I agree with the people of Tapology, and I agree with you, Joe. I just hope it's not weird scorecards by the end of this one. That would be pretty unfortunate. We got next up, we want to talk about Shamil Gaziev versus Don'Tale Mayes. Oh, okay, just Shamil Gaziev's coming up. I'm going with Shamil Gaziev here. I think he's the better overall fighter out of the two of these guys. Better grappling, better hands. Only one loss so far in his career, as opposed to Don'Tale Mayes, who's had a couple of sloppy losses in the past to not great competition. So very similar to Jai Herbert. I'm going to go with Shamil Gaziev here. He has the ability to take this fight where he would like to. He can ground and pound Don'Tale Mayes. Don'Tale Mayes has kind of shown, that he can shell up a little bit, or that he's inclined to shell up as opposed to getting up, and is more willing to eat those shots on the ground and maybe accept a TKO. Training partner with John Jones, allegedly, but they probably hang out more in like the back rooms of weird establishments than they do in an octagon together. So I'm going to go with Shamil Gaziev. What do you got?
Yeah, I have to agree with you for a bunch of reasons. One thing I want to bring up, too, is that Shamil Gaziev's had a really weird start to his UFC career. I like to compare him to like a Nurmagomedov, where he comes into the UFC, he has one fight. I'm not saying Martin Budai's a can necessarily, but he has a favorable matchup, and he looks really good against Budai. So the UFC thinks, we don't have a lot of heavyweight stars coming up. We lack prospects in this division, so let's put him in a 5-round main event against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I don't think it was the best decision in the world by the UFC. I mean, Jairzinho ended up looking really good. A lot of people might be against Gaziev in this fight because of how he looked in that fight, but we have to recognize that the level difference there is just massive. I mean, even Jairzinho realized that when we got to round 3 and 4, we know Jairzinho is a low-volume guy. I think in the first 2 rounds he landed, 10 to 15 significant strikes, anywhere in that range. And then when we get to round 3 and 4, he's putting up 35, 40, 45 on Gaziev. And I have to think that that's just – he realized that this guy wasn't on his level, and he had no respect for what was coming back. And then Gaziev, first time I've ever seen it, cardiac arrest, TKO. I haven't seen someone give up like that. I mean, it was a crazy fight, but I think they're bringing him back to his level here, and I think they know that Don'Tale Mayes is going one direction, and then Gaziev, they want him to go in the other direction. So there's going to be a lot of other fights on this card where I think it's going to be the same dynamic of one guy on his way up and the other guy on his way down. And you made a great point. Don'Tale Mayes is primarily a boxer, and he's not even really a great striker. He seems to be flat-footed a lot of times. You'll see him throwing a lot of spinning back fists and like really big attacks, and I think that can make him gas in this fight. I see Gaziev pressuring him against the cage. He's a little shorter than Mayes, but he's going to be a lot bigger size-wise. I think he can wear on him, and I think he will get takedowns. Don'Tale Mayes has been taken down by almost everyone he's fought, and half those guys aren't in the UFC anymore. So I see Gaziev wearing on him as the fight goes. I see him, getting top position, winning 2 rounds, probably just being on top, and Mayes hasn't shown much of a get-up game. So I'll agree with you here. I'm going to go Gaziev in a 29-28 decision.
Yeah, he's really going to dictate this fight. It's going to be his choice what happens. Next up, we got Alonzo Menifield versus Azamat Murzakanov. What do you think about this one, Joe?
This is an interesting fight, man. Alonzo Menifield, first off, gets KO'd by Carlos Ulberg in 12 seconds. Fair play. You can't really knock him for that. I think Ulberg's one of the best 205 prospects that we've seen in a long time. And he's just fast. He's skilled. He's quick. And problem with Menifield is he's come out some fights and he's had this low volume approach to where he's willing to just stand in the middle and kind of stare off and wait to find the big shot. And in this fight, Murzakanov is kind of the same way. The one thing, though, is that I see Murzakanov having the striking defense advantage. And I also see him having the durability advantage, if the fight goes into the later rounds. We've seen Murzakanov go into late second round, third round, and find the finish if he needed to, or just grind out a decision. That Tafon Nchukwi fight right there, it's a great example. I think he was losing that fight. While it was close, and Chukwi was on a good run himself in the UFC before he was released, and Mirzakhanov finds that it wasn't even a jump knee, right? It was just kind of like a lift knee. He comes in and just like feints, and he lifts his knee, and he caught him right on the side of the head. It was a really nice KO. We haven't seen him fight in a while. I think he was injured at some point, so that might be why he's taking this time off. I think he's going to come back fresh. I think he's got the cardio advantage, like I said, and we haven't really seen him cracked in the UFC. On the other hand, Menafield, when OSP puts you out, I have to take that into consideration when I'm making a pick for a fight. I know it was a few years back, but it still holds weight for me. And if this fight gets to a brawl, I don't trust Menafield's chin. And if it's a tit-for-tat striking match, I think Mirzakhanov is more technical, and I think he's going to get this win by decision. If Menafield wants to go and play the game of, I might have my back against the wall here. If I don't win this fight, who knows what my career looks like. If he goes for it, I think that's a recipe for disaster as well with the history of his chin. So I think Azamat either counter strike KOs him, or he wins a decision here comfortably, just managing the range and even mixing in the wrestling a little bit.
Yeah, I can't say it any better than you just did. I do think Alonzo Menafield's chin is potentially cracked after that Carlos Ulberg fight and some of the other bad losses he's had in the past. And I do like the guy. He went on a little bit of a run there, a couple of win streak, and ultimately I think he's going to lose to Azamat Mirzakhanov as well. More technical. I think he's more likely to just touch Alonzo Menafield on the button. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, you made a good point too. Menafield it's kind of been a mixed bag with his UFC career. He came in, he beat a couple guys he should have beat, and then, he lost some fights. He lost to OSP, lost to a couple other guys, but then he went on that nice run there. He had that saga with Jimmy Crute. The first fight was a draw. It was a really good fight. I mean, they both look good. I was a little bit higher on Jimmy Crute in the past than I am now, so
Same.
Take that with a grain. And the second fight, he looked dominant and he won as he should. Menafield, that is. So, that was probably the peak of his career right there when he beat Jimmy Crute in that second fight. I feel like people thought it was, going up for him. William Knight is another loss that he has on his record, which is crazy to look back at now. It's like, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say William Knight's the real big fellow that can't strike, right? And just loses all the time. He looks like he should be beating everybody. He looks like a titan, but he stinks. Yeah,
it's crazy. Some of these guys, their UFC careers, man, you watch, 2 fights and then you watch their next 2 fights and it looks like they're completely different guys. And it's like, who knows what the case is? Maybe they lose some of their steam, or, they lose confidence, or they get older and their bodies deteriorate. You don't really know, but it's just wild to watch the sport. And, we've been watching the sport for a long time. So we see these guys come in, their first fights till their 8th, 9th, 10th. And, the differences sometimes are vast, and that could be a good or a bad thing,
Yeah, I feel like I'm watching Raul Rosas Jr. grow up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, especially because of how young he is.
Yeah, and I plan on watching the sport probably for the rest of my life, as long as it doesn't become atrocious in any sort of way. But there's a chance that we will get to witness someone like that. To your point, someone like that's whole career, from start to finish, from the time he's in high school to maybe 20 years from now he's retiring from MMA, or 20 years would be a nice career. That would be great. Maybe 10 years, you look. But then he's still only 28. Who knows? We'll probably be watching someone like that his whole career. Anyways, let's jump into our main card picks. All right. Kicking off the main card as this loads up on my screen, we have, I believe, Elvis Brenner versus Joel Alvarez. And I like Elvis Brenner a lot. This is a pretty even fight. Both guys coming in here at plus 100 for Elvis Brenner, minus 120 for Joel Alvarez, who looks a lot like Andrew Schultz. I saw that in a meme earlier today. It was all famous people that look like these guys. I saw Andrew Schultz on there, and it didn't make sense. But now I'm seeing it on his Tapology picture.
I think it's the haircut, man.
Yeah, it's definitely the haircut and the facial structure for sure. All he needs is that goofy mustache. But I like Elvis Brenner a lot. And he's vicious. He's mean. We've seen him come back from pretty tight spots, especially against Guram Kutulidze, who's also on this card in the prelims. And, unfortunately hasn't really panned out the way that we thought that he would. But last loss coming into against Miktikbek Oralbai. I like Oralbai. Fair loss. Great decision fight. Lots of good grappling exchanges. Huge fan of all these guys coming out of shoot the box too. We talked about that beforehand. Yeah, I'm just gonna go with Elvis Brenner. I like him. I feel like he's vicious, he's angry, and he could probably beat just about anybody. He's young, he's 26, as opposed to Joel Alvarez is 31. Joel Alvarez is 6'3", as opposed to Elvis Brenner's 5'10". But Elvis Brenner is the type of guy that can close the distance, get in there and touch somebody on the chin, and then follow up with some form of grappling. So I'm gonna go with Elvis Brenner here. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this fight. We talked about this even before we got on mic and started chopping it up before we went live. Elvis Brenner has had a really crazy UFC career so far. Like we said before, he came in on short notice and fought Garam, and that was one of the craziest comebacks I've seen in the last few years of the sport. You know, Garam's piecing him up. Elvis Brenner's got a nice cut on his forehead. He's leaking everywhere. And then round 3 starts, and, 90% of fighters, when you get beat up like that, it's not even a choice or a matter of will. It's just you get beat down like that. It's kind of hard to rally back and win a fight like that, especially against a guy like Garam who's so skilled. And Elvis Brenner was in the fight as much as he was, 30 seconds in, started round 3, bloodied up and all that. So it's got to be discouraging when you fight a guy like that and you give him everything you got and he just keeps coming forward. And then Elvis Brenner caught him with that nice hook on the neck and kind of messed with Garam's equilibrium, put him out. It was a great fight. So I expect this fight to be really violent. I think this has fight of the night written all over it. If it goes, long enough. On Joel Alvarez's side, he's had an interesting UFC career. He was touted very highly coming in. He's only lost to really good competition as well in the UFC. Damir Ismagulov beat him, his first fight in the UFC. No slouch there. Damir was a great fighter. He's retired now, but he had some really good fights in the UFC and is a really technical striker, hard guy to handle. And then obviously Arman Tsarukyan, that guy is world-class championship level fighter. We've all seen it. So, there's no shame in losing to him there. But the rest of the guys he's fought, man, Joel Alvarez is a killer. He's a killer be killed fighter. He's really dangerous in round 1. So I'm interested to see this clash here where Elvis Brenner is the guy that, withstands the beating and can go late in the fights and, makes it a dogfight. Always has that comeback in him, where Joel Alvarez is a guy who wants to put you out of there in the first round. So it's going to be Joel Alvarez trying to keep the distance. I expect to see a lot of leg kicks early on. He might even shoot in some takedowns here because his submission game is really good. And one thing with Alvarez, too, that we've seen is he doesn't need to take the fight to the ground to get submissions because guys will come in on him and try to shoot or clinch up, and he can jump a guillotine from there, or if he gets taken down, he'll go for your neck. He's really skilled there. So I'm actually going to go with Alvarez on this one. I think in round 1 he's really dangerous, and Brenner has had a good UFC career so far. He's been in a lot of fun fights, but I don't know how much punishment he could take from a guy like Alvarez here with the height advantage, with the reach advantage. I see him piecing him up in round 1, and if he could chop that leg, slow him down, I could see him, getting a TKO or even, latching up a submission, like I said. But I'm going to pick Joel Alvarez, and I think I'm going to go with a second-round TKO.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said, especially the body work from distance and the leg kicks. It's just a matter of if Elvis Brenner is going to be able to withstand all that punishment. And I think he could. But, there's a world in which he gets put out because you can't keep, going into those battles forever and coming out on top. Just waiting for Tapology to load up. What do we got next?
Coming up next fight on the main card is Mackenzie Dern and Lupe Godinez. I'll start with this one. This is an interesting fight. It's a funny callback, too. I don't know if you remember this. First time I was on the show, we were doing Volk versus Korean Zombie card, and Mackenzie Dern fought Tisha Torres on that card. It's a good callback there to my first appearance. So, Mackenzie Dern and Lupe, this is a good fight. The odds are really close here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Mackenzie Dern is minus 120 or close to even money here. And, there you go. And Lupe's even money there. This is going to be an interesting fight. I think this is a make-or-break fight for Mackenzie Dern. Not necessarily in, her career as a MMA fighter. I don't think she's going to get cut or anything like that. But if she loses this fight, it's going to, show a lot of people that everyone had these high expectations for her. She has this great jiu-jitsu pedigree, and she could really, submit anybody if the fight gets to the ground. But if she can't beat a fighter like Lupe, that's no disrespect to Lupe. I like her a lot. But if she can't win this fight, it's going to be a lot of questions going forward on whether she can compete even in the top 5 or 10, let alone fight for a championship. Problem with Mackenzie Dern over the years that we've seen is when she fights these really good girls and these strikers and these fighters that are well-rounded everywhere, she has this jiu-jitsu pedigree, but she cannot get the fight to the ground herself, man. I haven't seen her improve on her wrestling and her offensive wrestling, to be specific. And I don't see her winning a tit-for-tat striking battle with Loopy here. Loopy's as tough as they come, man. She's been really active. You know, it was 2 or 3 years ago she had that stretch where she fought twice in a year, and then they called her on short notice. She fought 2 weeks later. She's fought up a weight class against Luana Carolina. She lost that fight, but just goes to show that she has that heart, man. She loves to fight. Every fight she's in, she fights with urgency. She's never settling. She's never, accepting a position. She's a great scrambler. She's not getting taken down a lot, but when she is, she's very active and, always trying to get up, even offensively attacking from the bottom there. So I see this fight playing out primarily on the feet because, like I said, I don't see Mackenzie Dern really improving on her offensive wrestling, and I think Loopy has the takedown defense to keep this on the feet. And it's going to be a scrap. I think it's going to be a scrap, and we've seen Mackenzie Dern, get outstruck in those battles where she's the one who has to keep it on the feet, and it goes late in the fight, and it gets down to a battle of will, and I just don't think she has the striking technique or the urgency on the feet to really get it done. So I'm going to go with Loopy here. If the fight gets to the ground, it'll make it really interesting, but even if it does, I think Loopy has the wrestling chops to get up and scramble her way, even to get top position in some aspects of the fight. So I'm going to go with Loopy here in a close decision win.
Yeah, I agree. Right there with you on everything. The only things that I could add to that are that Mackenzie Dern is recognized publicly to the media that Loopy Godinez is a big-time brawler. She, like you said, she wants to go in there and put your lights out early, sense of urgency. And I think that she's going to touch up Mackenzie Dern pretty early. She's going to go rock her a couple times, and Mackenzie is going to shoot something really, really sloppy that maybe puts Loopy in a position to finish her, maybe from like a ground and pound. She kind of flips her off, uses her hips. She's really good with her hips, or locks something up, on the way down. I mean, Mackenzie's got really great jiu-jitsu, great submission defense, so it's more likely Loopy just gets up and, continues fighting on her feet. But I do see a world in which maybe Loopy finishes Mackenzie Dern here. Well, like you said, Mackenzie Dern's career is not in jeopardy despite all the losses, I don't think. Because she has been a mainstay of the UFC, and we've seen characters at this point that have been around for a long time, continue to stick around for a long time, even if it's undeserved. Speaking of Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chiesa.
It's a great segue, man. That was perfect.
Thank you. I didn't even think about that ahead of time. Clicked back. And so, I mean, I should be an improv, I guess. I don't know. But, yeah, Tony Ferguson, guy, been around way too long. Michael Chiesa, also, in my opinion, been around way too long. And now we get to watch the two of them fight. Oh, my God, look at all those big red L's under Tony's name. Both of their names, but Tony in particular.
It's like a bad test.
Yeah, it makes me really sad. But I think he's going to win this week. And call me crazy. I'm betting against a minus 410 favorite, Michael Chiesa, going with the plus 320, 40-year-old dog, Tony Ferguson. I mean, they're not too far off in age. Michael Chiesa is 36. But he's also on a pretty decent losing streak himself, 3-0. The only difference between the two of these guys is that I think that if Michael Chiesa loses, he'll probably step away from the sport. And if Tony Ferguson loses, he's probably going to try again if they let him. But Tony's been talking about he's been sparring going into this fight, which is first time in a long time. He hasn't sparred in like 8 years. I think after the David Goggins thing, a lot of people got in his ear and they were like, dude, you need to just train like a fighter. Everything that you've been doing for the past like 10 years, it worked for you when you were – basically it worked for you all the way up until you fought Justin Gaethje, throwing sand in people's eyes, whatever weird stuff you were doing. It was working. And now it's not. We got to get back to the fundamentals, back to the basics, because at 40 years old, there's no other way that you win. You don't win doing goofy stuff because you get caught. And that's happened to him a lot recently. So I think Tony is going to be back to the basics. I think Michael Chiesa is a guy who is, if Tony touches him a few times, I mean, Tony's looked so slow, though. This is the problem. Like, he looked slow against Nate Diaz. He looked slow against Bobby and Patty. But Michael Chiesa is no specimen. He's not those guys either. And now we have Tony fighting at welterweight. Kind of like getting my mental process through it right now because I want to pick Tony, but I'm also second guessing it. Yes, I think I'm gonna still go Tony. I think Michael Chiesa and Tony look about the same speed at this point. Maybe Tony will land like the cleaner 1-2s and the leg kicks, and Michael Chiesa will try to shoot a takedown. And Michael Chiesa's submission defense is really not that great. Tony's had some good submission wins in the past. Actually, Michael Chiesa, I believe, has lost by Darce choke like multiple times in his career. So what if we see the Darce Knight emerge? Well, that's my bet. You know what? That's my pick. I'm going to go with Tony Ferguson, and I think he's going to win by submission. So I think that's like plus 1,400 the last time I checked. I hope that stupid logic rambling train that I just took us down made sense. But I'm going with Tony Ferguson at plus 1,400 to win by submission. But Tony Ferguson is my official pick. Please bet responsibly. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, there's a lot to say about this fight. I wanted to add too. First, I'm looking as of a day ago. The odds have really juiced up for Michael Chiesa too. Chiesa's coming in at about minus 700 to minus 750 now. So
wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of money coming. I don't even want to say coming in from Chiesa because it's really just coming in against Tony. And you know, the last 4 or 5 years, it's kind of hard to bet on Tony, man. But both these guys have a lot going against them. You know, Tony has all these losses and Father Time catching up with him. He's tried all these different training methods and trainers and, you know, different things, like you said. And you get back to the basics, maybe that's enough. But I just don't know how much he has left in the tank. It's not in his mind. It's in his body, you know. You know, he comes out in these fights, like you said, against Beneil Dariush, he just looked like really slow. Couldn't defend the takedown. He couldn't transition. You know, he looked really good against Chandler and against King Green, as his name is now. We're gonna ride with that, I guess. But he started out really good, man. I mean, you know, he dropped Chandler in that first round, and everyone thought that, you know, Tony was back for that first round, and then, you know, we all know what happened. Second round, I'm not gonna bring Tony down further than he already is. And same thing against Green. He looked good in that first round, and you know, Green just really like outwilled him towards the end there. And I've never seen Tony get just strength submission like that. I don't think that was a matter of technique. You correct me if you think otherwise, but I don't think King Green really, you know, out techniqued him where he's that good of a grappler. I think he really he got him in a position and he just used his strength, and Tony just couldn't resist it. Like, I've never seen Tony get put in a position like that, and where it's not even that he gave up. He just got out muscled and out willed, and that's something that I'm afraid might happen here. As you said, Tony's coming up to welterweight. You know, he's not a small guy per se, but at welterweight, you know, Chiesa's got a pretty big frame, and he's been inactive himself. He's had a lot of injuries. So this is a really good matchup, I think. I think the UFC knew what they were doing, putting Tony against Chiesa. If there's a guy that has a somewhat of a name that Tony could beat, I think Chiesa is definitely one of them. You know, he's spending a lot of time at the desk instead of in the gym. But I think Chiesa is similar to what King Green did. I think Chiesa could will himself to a strength submission, if you want to call it, where, you know, he might be getting beat on the feet round 2, round 3, and he just goes and shoots a sloppy takedown. But the difference is, I don't think Tony has it in him to defend that, sprawl it, you know, even try to counter with a submission on his own. I think he just gets his hips taken from Chiesa. Chiesa lands on top, and I could see Chiesa doing a similar thing that King Green did. You know, I think arm triangle is the way to go. Tony's going to look good here at moments in this fight. I think he's going to look, you know, like he did against Chandler in round 1 and like he did against King Green in round 1. It may even go later in the fight this time. Hopefully the sparring will help with, you know, his shot placement and his head movement, you know, more so, because the striking defense was always a really good thing for Tony in his prime, and he's kind of lost it in his old age. It's a really tough fight. I would be very careful betting on this fight, like you said, because the Chiesa line is so juiced to where it's impossible to bet him unless you pick, you know, a round and a method, which is always risky. If you're a Tony fan and you want to see Tony get back in the win column and avoid 8 in a row, you know, sprinkle something on him, sprinkle Tony by submission, because if he gets a finish here, I think that's how it's done. But bet responsibly on this one. Is a big tag on this fight to bet responsibly, but ultimately I'm going to go with Chiesa getting late submission. I think he's going to get an arm triangle sometime in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I go back and forth. Like, you know, when you talk about the juice, like how juiced it's become over the past couple of days, and how much money is coming in on Michael Chiesa. I do believe in fading the public quite often and fading like the big money. I do think that there is profit in that every occasionally. Like, Drake throws like 40 million on somebody, I'm gonna fade Drake, but that's also just Drake. But typically you fade the public. The public is incorrect quite often. Otherwise everybody would be betting and rich and billionaires. So, what are you gonna say?
No, I was just saying it's a good point. It's tough to in UFC. At the end of the day, it's mano a mano. It's just two guys in there scrapping. So whatever the odds can tell you, and whatever your predictions are, and your fight research and analysis, it's at the end of the day the guy's got to fight, and that big plus money, it's like that for a reason. But at the same time, it's very dangerous to go with minus 700. Not only because of the lack of return that you get, it's just like you said, everyone in the world, Tapology said 75% on Chiesa here, and I'm sure the betting markets it might even be higher than that. So it's really hard to just go with that many people when you have a fight like this, and when you have all these uncertainties with Chiesa. Because as much as we talk about Tony losing all these fights, he's been active. He's been somewhat active for his age. We don't see a 40-year-old fighter fighting 2 times a year and fighting against all these high-level guys. Be it he's been finished a bunch and he's losing 7 in a row. This would be 8, but the fact that he's been in there might actually help him out here. Chiesa hasn't fought in a while, and even before Holland, I think he's fought 3 or 4 times since 2020. So it's going to be interesting. And I think Chiesa comes out slow to start. Like I said, I think Tony's going to have some moments in this fight more than his other fights. So maybe if you watch the fight and Tony looks good on the feet, if you like Chiesa, maybe a live bet is the way to go here. If Tony has a good round 1, even round 2 is close, that line might come down a little bit, and Chiesa might be somewhat bettable, even though the line will still be crazy. If we're going from minus 700 to minus 300 live, it's not worth it. But
yeah, it's gonna be nuts. I don't know. I'm still going Tony by Darce, dude. That's my pick.
I hope you're right, man. I hope you're right.
Yeah, me too, man. He's got a chink in the armor there with the some vulnerabilities with the Darce choke. All right, next up we got Chito Vera versus Davison Figueiredo. I don't want to go against Chito, but no, I'm gonna go with Chito. I'm gonna stick with Chito here. I'm gonna be biased on this one and stick with my man Chito Vera. Let's see the odds over here: plus 135 slight dog as of a Tapology as of whenever that was updated, as opposed to a minus 160 favorite for Davison Figueiredo, God of War. Chito's a bounce back type of guy. He does this where he goes win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. And sometimes when he takes a really bad loss, he comes back and has a pretty good win. You look, he had that really, it was a split decision loss to Corey Sandhagen. I ultimately thought he got dominated with the wrestling and everything. And then he comes back and has a really definitive decision win against Pedro Munoz. And then he loses to Sean O'Malley. He uses a human punching bag. Davison Figueiredo has looked really good at bantamweight. He looked great against Cody Garbrandt. Now that is Cody Garbrandt, right? And he choked out Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt that was willing to exchange with Davison Figueiredo, and Davison Figueiredo ultimately took him down and choked him out, rear naked choke. He's not going to have the grappling advantage over Chito Vera, I think, this week, or at least the submission advantage. Chito Vera is really good at defending chokes, really good at keeping his limbs intact. And Chito, I'm trying to make a case here, but I think that Davison's going to beat him up on his feet too. I think Davison's a little bit more creative. Chito's a little bit more willing to sit back sometimes, and Davison is really going to be the aggressor in a lot of exchanges. Again, I don't think Chito's going to get finished, and I think he's going to be wearing a lot of the damage, which really doesn't help him out when it comes to the judges' scorecards. So for that reason, I'm going to have to go with Davison Figueiredo. Unfortunately, I do really want to pick Chito, but I can't. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, this is a really good fight. I like that they have this on the Corey Umar card because the UFC does this a lot where they have showcases for certain divisions. If the main event is a high stakes fight with a certain division, they'll have 2 or 3 other fights where they might be 4 or 5 spots down the rankings. But this fight means a lot, man. Figueiredo is slowly making a case to become a top contender at bantamweight himself. If he wins this, he's got to be top 5 then, right? Top 5 in bantamweight with all the movement that's been going around, and Peter Yan's had his stretch of losses and wins, and Corey and Umar, who knows what's going to happen? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Figueiredo finds himself, if he wins this, he's one fight away from a title shot, supposedly. So I think this is a really big fight. Also for Cheeto, humiliating loss to the guy that he had that big win over. Who knows how his psyche is after that. I saw an interview with him, his media day. It seemed like he was pretty humble and pretty accepting of the loss, which is good to see because, Cheeto is a guy who has a big ego, and I don't mean that in a bad way. He's just a very prideful fighter, and, he's confident in his abilities and things like that. And he was taking the loss graciously. He was giving O'Malley credit, which is good to see because he's come to see over the last few years that these delusional fighters doesn't tend to work out for them. You got to be honest with yourself about what happens in the cage, and especially when you're fighting at a excuse me, when you're fighting at a championship level, you got to be honest with yourself about what happens in there. This fight could be a fight night main event on a lot of other cards too. So this goes to show how stacked this card is. They're rolling out the red carpet for Abu Dhabi. I think this is an interesting matchup though, man. Cheeto has this problem, and 5-round fights, it's a little bit toned down because he has a lot more time to work. But Cheeto tends to he lacks that sense of urgency, and he's very, he's very like content with, feeling out the first round, point fighting here. And when I say point fighting, I don't necessarily mean boring. I just mean, finding his timing and chopping at the legs and, kind of just finding his range and finding his movement. But in those 3-round fights, it's really detrimental, especially against a guy like Figueiredo, who he's the smaller guy here. Cheeto's going to have the reach. He's going to have the height. And I just think that Davison will be able to close that distance and, enter the void, as they say. I can see Davison doing well in the clinch here, going for some takedowns. Cheeto's takedown defense is pretty good, but we still see him get taken down by these guys he fights. Corey took him down a little bit. Even Rob Font was able to get him down. Frankie Edgar, who, great wrestler, his whole career, but he fought Frankie at the end of his career, and he was still able to get Cheeto down. I thought Frankie was winning that fight before Cheeto kicked him into orbit. So, it's interesting to see because this fight could end up being primarily on the ground. If Figueiredo finds his success in the grappling early, he may shift to a complete grappling heavy approach. And like you said, I don't see him submitting him or, even getting a ground and pound, because I think Cheeto is really aware with his defense, striking and grappling defense. But yeah, I don't see any of these guys getting finished here. I think this goes to decision regardless. If I was a betting man, I would, put some money on the over, or fight goes the distance, because, Cheeto's got a granite chin. We've seen that time and time again. And I think Davison, he's been rocked before at flyweight. We saw Brandon Moreno clip him in their fights, but I think the lack of the weight cut is really helping Davison. He looks a lot fresher. He looks a lot bigger. And I think Cheeto's really going to have to get on his bike early here. If he doesn't, he might look great in round 2 and round 3, and he might just get, edged out on the scorecards because of the activity of Davison. And Davison's not the most active fighter either. He doesn't, throw out heavy volume, but he hits hard, and I think he's going to be able to mix up the clinch with the wrestling more than Cheeto here. And I could just see Cheeto being really too patient for his own good. So I'm going to go with Davison Figueiredo here. I think he wins a decision. I could see, 2 29-28s and a 30-27 in a fight that, looks closer to the eyes, but on paper, it might be all Davison.
Yeah, I totally agree. Cheeto's the type of guy when you start getting weird and creative and you mix.
Oh, we lost Keith there for a second. All right. Well, till he comes back. I think what he was going on to say is that Cheeto, mixes it up on the feet. He throws a lot of flashy stuff, throws a lot of kicks. We've seen him at highlight reel KOs before. Hey, welcome back, man. I was trying to continue your speech there, but you're here now, so continue what you were saying.
Oh yeah, I was just saying once you start getting weird against Cheeto, that seems to be the path to victory. You get weird and then you mix in a little bit of wrestling. Sean O'Malley didn't really have to do that, but if you can use all 4 limbs in your striking game effectively, then you're going to have a little bit of success against Cheeto, because he has a hard time when he's got a lot to look at.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another point I wanted to make before is that this isn't a knock to Cheeto. I think it's just, props to him for being so tough, and props to him for finding this power. Earlier on in his career, he won a lot of fights in the UFC. He's been in the UFC for a decade now. It seems like it hasn't been that long, especially the newer fans of the sport. They haven't really seen, much of Cheeto before his ranked run and his title run, but he's been in the UFC a long time, and he was winning a lot of decisions, and he actually had a few submissions back in the day. A lot more aggressive on the ground. But in his run to the top, he's had these fights, Dominic Cruz, Frankie Edgar. Like, on paper, these are fights that people would think he'd be winning the whole time, but Dominic Cruz won a couple rounds against Cheeto, and that's, late 30s Dominic Cruz. Frankie Edgar was taking him down with success, even against Rob Font. The main point I'm trying to make is that Cheeto found this power at bantamweight where he never had before. He's losing these fights, and then late round 2, round 3, he just finds a shot, whether it's a head kick or a front kick or something. Saw that Rob Font fight. Font outstruck him almost 2-1. And you look at Rob Font's face after the fight, it looks like he just went through a chainsaw, and Cheeto absorbed 150, 200 strikes, and he looked like he barely broke a sweat. It's just, props to Cheeto. He hits hard. But I think that depending on that power and that lack of volume against a guy like Davison is not going to play into his favor. So that's ultimately why I think, Davison wins this one, because I don't see anyone getting finished here. And in a 3-round fight, I can't favor Cheeto winning a decision, so I'm going with Davison.
Great pick, great logic, and I appreciate you covering while we have technical difficulties. So I don't know what what the deal is tonight. Maybe somebody hacked Tapology or something. But
maybe it's Tom in Aruba.
Yeah, actually joining the stream. No, just kidding. Next up, we got Shara Bullet Magomedov versus Michael Olajushek. I have a hard time with these multi-syllable.
It's all right, man. It's all right.
But I'm gonna go with the guy whose name is easier to say, Shara Magomedov, and not for that reason, but this one-eyed freak is incredible. I like him. He's awesome, striking off his back, on the ground. He can pretty much do it all, I think, at this point. But he really doesn't have to. His striking is enough. But he's really good defensively off of his back as well when it comes to, he throws a lot of up kicks, a lot of really creative stuff off of his back. I like the guy quite a bit. He's got a lot of hype about him. Maybe there's a chance that the hype train comes to an end at some point. Don't see it happening this week, though. Mikhail, not going to try it again. Bad loss against Kevin Holland the last time around a month ago. I believe he's taking this fight on short notice as well. Another bad loss to Michelle Pajeda. Beat Chidi and Joe Kwani, and a loss to Caio Barallo. I do believe that Shara Bullet is potentially on par with those guys, those Kevin Hollands, and maybe even better. Those Michelle Pajedas. This is just another stepping stone for Shara. The UFC is very thought out and methodical when they have a star and how they want to build them. As in the co-main event in Abu Dhabi, he's super popular in that region. It's a boxing setup. Like, I almost believe that it's a pretty solidified win coming in. Anything could happen, right? Mano y mano, like you said. But I think Shara Bullet's going to pull it off. His star power is going to keep going up, keeps rising up the middleweight. Not rankings. He's not ranked yet, but eventually. And go on to fight some pretty big names, maybe like a Caio Barallo next. So I'm going with Shara Bullet. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you. In terms of the pick, I like Shara to win here. I'm not in as much agreement with his star power per se. I'm not as impressed as some people may be with his run so far. Bruno Silva was a really good win for his debut and his last fight. Tricolo was the guy. I believe he stepped in on short notice, and that was a gimme fight, like you said. They kind of gave him something where they just needed him to fight, and that's how you build stars in the UFC. We saw it with Sean O'Malley. We saw it with a lot of other guys where it's more important about getting them out there and getting them finishes and getting them big wins as compared to who they fight. So I think the UFC, like you said, they know what they're doing, getting him a good matchup, especially in front of his home fans. Oleg Zaitchuk is a good matchup for him as well because a lot of people I've seen making jokes that Shara is one of the only Dagestanis who isn't like a grappling heavy, just like wet blanket. He's a great striker. He's really entertaining to watch. So it's a big contrast compared to a lot of the fighters we see coming out of that region. And Oleg Zaitchuk is not a guy who's going to take you down. He's a brawler. He's a kill or be killed fighter. As you see, his losses are usually mid-first round. Bahayo took him to the second round, but he goes out there to take your head off. And I think Shara is going to be defensively sound enough to weather the storm early, and he's not going to have to worry about a takedown coming his way, unless Oleg Zaitchuk gets hurt here and gets desperate. I don't really see him shooting for takedowns. I think he's going to go out there to swing that big left hand, try to go with some body work, but I think Shara is going to be able to manage the distance. chopping his legs, chopping his body. And then, I could see Oleg Zaechuk going to block a body kick, and that kick comes up on the side of the head. Yeah, I could see that happening. Ultimately, I think Shar wins this fight by decision, but I could see the finish path as well because Oleg Zaechuk, like I said, he's a kill-or-be-killed fighter. He doesn't go out there to win a decision. He doesn't go out there to manage his time and his distance. He goes out there to take your head off, and against guys who are more skilled than you, it's not going to help you. I do want to add one thing, too. I don't know if you saw this, Keith, but on Oleg Zaechuk's Instagram, some Polish fans were giving him some comments in his comment section. Somebody asked him, Michael, are you going to think about going to KSW after you lose this fight? And that's coming from this Polish fans. I love these Polish fans, man. They're ruthless. They're getting on their guy. They're not sugarcoating it. They expect greatness. And so somebody comments, they go, are you looking at KSW when you lose this fight? Not even if, like when you lose this fight. And he commented back and he said something along the lines of, I don't know if I lose this fight, which I probably will. I think I'm done with sports. So I don't know if that was satire or if it's he's being sarcastic and there's people that he knows or anything like that. But a couple weeks ago, you can find that comment. He said, "I will quit sports if I lose this fight," and also added on that he probably will lose this fight. So I don't know if that's him trying to be lighthearted about getting thrown a bad matchup or that the UFC wants him to lose. But whenever I see something like that, you have to incorporate it into a fight, especially if you're going to put money on a fight, because we've seen this before with a lot of fighters when they have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. The UFC is brutal. It's the highest of highs. It's the best fighters in the world, and you can't go in there with any sort of doubts in yourself. So I think Shara wins this one. And originally, 5 minutes ago, I said decision, but the more I think about it, I think Oleg Zaechuk's going to go out there and really try to take his head off, and I think he's going to get pieced up in that moment. And I don't know if Shara really drops him and KOs him out cold, but I think he could hurt him, wobble him, and we get like a against the fence TKO or something like that. He hits him with a head kick and he wobbles him, and Shara just unloads the bunch of punches and the ref calls it off. So I'm going to change my official method here. I'm going to go Shara, and I think we get like a late first round, early second round TKO.
Yeah, I think he's going to finish him as well. The kick work is beautiful, and like you said, like maybe something comes up over the top when Oleg Zaechuk is expecting a body kick, and you can't half-ass fighting. So right there with you on all that. Going with Shara Bullet. All right, super pumped for this one. Main event time. Like I said at the beginning, I've met this person, taken a picture with him, and he was as kind as could be. That is Corey Sandhagen going up against Umar Nurmagomedov. And one guy who is not 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and has a very interesting, mental take on, just mindset, I suppose, is Corey Sandhagen. If you listen to any of his interviews, super thoughtful, super deep. And he has said, maybe there's a chance I lose this fight, but not in the same way where he's like, I'm going to lose this and I'm going to quit everything. Corey Sandhagen is very realistic. He's very realistic about the outcomes. He's a very namaste type of guy at this point in his career. A couple of years ago, he went on Joe Rogan and talked about how he wanted to kill people and stuff. And then he kind of took a step back. He's like, I still want to kill people, but it's different now. And he has been waiting for this fight for quite some time. Something happened with Umar, whether it be visa issues or health issues. This fight was supposed to happen a while back, I believe, and got pushed a couple times. And Corey Sandhagen is not shying away from the fact that Umar Nurmagomedov has this last name, and he's got the skills that come with the last name and, the training background. And he's not afraid of that at all. When you listen to him talk, a lot of guys are afraid of these Dagestani guys, and they know that the challenge that they present, and he's taking a huge risk by jumping, taking a guy that's ranked much lower than him, when Corey Sandhagen could take an easier fight and potentially fight for the title next. So I'm going to go with Corey. Great takedown defense, incredible striking, super creative, has fun out there, throws a lot of weird, interesting stuff. I think that this is going to go the distance, and I think that there are going to be moments where Corey does something that maybe he looks like he's having fun, or it's a little bit sloppy, something spinning, that Umar goes in there for a takedown and maybe ground and pounds him out. But Corey's another guy that, since he got choked out by Aljamain Sterling, he's worked on his wrestling game and his defensive jiu-jitsu and submission defense so much. he's a crazy guy, you know, like he loses by submission and then he goes in the gym and practices and practices and practices. It's that Kobe Bryant mentality of being in the gym 24/7. And now he's training with Trevor Whitman, who, if you don't know, was with Justin Gaethje and Kamaru and Rose Namajunas. Obviously, you know, but for the people at home, when they had that incredible run, the three of them were like, two of them were champs, and the third one was on the cusp and having incredible moments left and right. I think that Corey Sandhagen working with Trevor Whitman is it's really gonna work out for him, because Trevor Whitman is so good at game planning, and Corey's a guy that notices tendencies. He's able to pick up on a lot of things. He watches a lot of film, and a lot of these Dagestani guys do have like tells when they shoot for takedowns. We saw even Dustin Poirier be able to defend a couple of takedowns because there's a tell. They drop their heads a lot of the time, and Umar Nurmagomedov does it as well. He's got great striking. He's got like really nice, like a really good kickboxing game. But I think that Corey's experience is going to shine through here, and I think that he's going to make all of us proud. So I'm going with Corey Sandhagen. What do you think?
So before I break down this fight, what I think of it, I just want to say two things. One, I love that that Joe Rogan interview you mentioned, and I think the quote that he said was, he woke up after getting choked out from Aljamain, and he looked around and he saw him running around the ring, and he made the decision that day that I want to be the guy running around the ring. You know, yeah. He felt so bad that, in that moment of that loss, even though just coming back to consciousness and just looking up and seeing the bright lights, like he never wanted to feel that again. So, like you said, I love that mentality he has about training, about going into fights, and he's the nicest guy in the world, but he's a trained killer, and I love the contrast of that. Another thing I wanted to mention, could have brought it up earlier in the episode, talking about the whole card. I find it interesting that UFC has rolled out the red carpet here for Abu Dhabi, not only in terms of how stacked the card is, but they changed the fight time to benefit, over there it's going to be, probably a 5 or 6 o'clock start, and it's going to end at 11 or 12, where we just watched last week, Manchester pay-per-view. We got Leon and Bilal fighting at 5:30 in the morning. It's just interesting, thinking where the UFC's heart lies and where their pockets lie, to be more specific.
Oil money, bro. I don't know if you saw they're calling the Sphere. It's not only UFC Noche at the Sphere. Now it's like Riyadh season, UFC Noche at the Sphere. What is Riyadh season? I'm not aware of all this Saudi oil money, but I'm sorry, continue.
No, yeah, it's a good point, man. It's just funny to look at the UFC from, we look at the fights and we analyze all this stuff. And when you look at it from a business perspective, it's a lot different. But yeah, this is a really great fight, man. I think this is the perfect fight to cap off this card. Shout out to Corey for fighting down in the rankings and taking I don't know if he's the boogeyman yet, but he has the potential to be the boogeyman in this division in terms of people not wanting to fight him. So whatever happens here, Corey is a BMF for sure. Corey's looked really good his last few fights. He's had to use his wrestling and his experience a bit more in his last few fights, which, a lot of people were upset about the Rob Font fight. He kind of wrestled him for majority of the fight, but listen, man, when you're at that level, you got to do what you got to do to win. Been around the sport, been watching it long enough, and you can't just expect every fighter and every fight to go out there and get a spinning head kick or a flying knee, which he has done on multiple occasions. It's not like Corey has given us boring fights over the years, so I feel like people got to cut him some slack on his last few performances. Even if they're wins, people will still find something to criticize. A lot of MMA fans are questionable, but it's another conversation for another day. This is going to be a really good fight. I like that this is 5 rounds as well, because we really get to see if Umar is ready for prime time, for a lack of a better term. He hasn't really shown any signs of gassing out and blowing all his cardio in the first round or two. So we'll really get to see it here, and we'll get to see it against a tested veteran, one of the best guys in the division, guy who's went 5 rounds, and even in the fights he's lost, that fight against Peter Yan, one of my favorite UFC fights of all time. Was that in Abu Dhabi as well?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, or was it that Singapore card with Yuri and Glover?
Could have been. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Abu Dhabi as well. That interim title fight, one of the best, most technical fights. If you're new to the sport or if you haven't seen that fight in full, go find it on YouTube. Go find it on Fight Pass. Just like an amazing chess match, and even though Corey lost that fight, he actually looked really good. Peter Yan was just a step ahead. But yeah, this is a big test. I'm glad for both parties because, like I said,
Corey's stepping down in the rankings, and you're gonna pull up that fight there. What card was that on?
It might have been the Singapore card.
It was Jan versus Teixeira. That's when Glover won the belt. Okay,
and it was Abu Dhabi.
I mixed up my cards there. I knew Glover was on there, but yeah, that was a great card too.
Yeah, it was. It was awesome. Islam versus Dan Hooker. Hamza versus Li Xinglang. Sorry,
that was a great card. Yeah. No, you're good. I wanted to clarify that too because I was confused. But yeah, so the way I see this fight playing out, like I said before about Shara, Umar is really good on the feet, man. He's really crafty with his kicks. Particularly his front kicks and his side kicks to the body. I don't want to compare it to Wonderboy Thompson because he's not on that level of striking, but he reminds me of that in terms of he could use that front kick as almost like a jab. He snaps it out just to check his range, just to set you back a little bit, and it's so fast it almost comes out like a jab. I think it's going to be really interesting seeing these guys on the feet. But at the end of the day, I think Umar is the real deal, first of all. I've watched him fight, and while he hasn't fought the highest level, he's only had one ranked win. I don't know if Barcelos is even ranked anymore or even in the UFC anymore, but we've seen a lot of these Dagestani guys, man. And people gave Islam slack for not fighting great competition, and we saw what he turned into, right? Bobby Green was his claim to Bobby Green and Dan Hooker were his claim to getting a title shot, and everyone wanted to give him shit for it, So I think Umar is legit. I think he's ready for this, and I think Umar is going to be able to handle himself on the feet and be able to mix it in just enough to win rounds and to get control time here. Corey's takedown defense has definitely improved, and he's no slouch with the grappling, but I think the main difference here is that Corey might just be a little too weak for Umar, man. I think Umar is really strong. I think Umar is going to show his strength in the clinch. I think he's going to be able to trip him out, keep him on the ground. I don't see Umar really finishing him unless Corey tries to get a little overzealous and, like against Aljamain, he's trying to get up and he gives up his neck, gives up his back. I think Corey's going to be on point with his defense, but I could see Umar's strength really, winning him this fight. And I don't think it's going to be a dominating decision, or I don't think it's going to be 4 rounds of 20 minutes of control time or anything like that. But I think they're going to trade a lot on the feet. Corey's going to have his moments. He may even hurt Umar a couple times, but I think Umar is going to be able to win 3 rounds here. Control time, clinch time, land some elbows up top. Just keep that top position right out the round, and I think he's going to be able to really mix it up. I hope this fight stays on the feet more than it goes on the ground because I think this is going to be a really good technical striking match. Because people see Nurmagomedov and they think, oh, this guy's a wrestler. He's going to wet blanket him. Like, this guy's boring. He's not boring at all. If you haven't watched his fights, go watch some tape on him. Really quick question mark kicks, really good body kicks. And I think it's going to be really good on the feet. So hopefully we get, 3 to 4 rounds of pure striking. But my gut is telling me that Umar is going to be able to mix it up just enough to win a decision here. And if Corey doesn't cut him open, or if Corey doesn't knock him down and this fight goes to the judges, I think we all know who the judges are going to side with here. Not saying it's going to be the wrong decision or the right one. If Umar wins and he deserves it, props to him. But I think if the fight is close and Umar wins, even if Umar wins 2 rounds on the ground, right, it's going to come down to a last round, and they're going to look at that and they're going to go, we're going to go with the guy who was on top of him, who was pressuring him, who was elbowing him. So I think it's going to be a really good fight. I'm really excited for it. I think Umar is the real deal. I think Corey is by far his toughest test. And, as much as I said props to Corey for taking this fight, props to Umar for taking this fight too, because he hasn't fought anyone with this pedigree and this experience in the UFC. And he's coming to do it, 5 rounds. Yeah, it is in his backyard. He's going to have his home crowd there to support him. So that goes to his benefit as well. But, Corey Sandhagen is a tough day for anyone at 135. And I think the line here is a bit steep as well. So, if you're betting on this one, however you go, I mean, Umar's coming in at about minus 300, minus 330 right now. So, a guy who hasn't fought in the top of the UFC, it's hard to lay that with him. But I think Umar by decision is my pick here. Curious to see what that Corey by decision prop is as well, because regardless of who wins this fight, I think it goes the distance. I think Corey, might shine in the championship rounds, but like I said, I think the grappling from Umar is going to put him ahead on the scorecards, and it might be, too late for Corey. So I'm going to go with Umar. I think this fight's going to be really fun, and I think we're going to see a star breakout here with Umar.
I hope you're wrong. But I think you're right. Just to touch on all that stuff, forgot about it. I mentioned earlier in the episode, the Abu Dhabi judges and the fact that he's probably going to have an IV at some point and nobody's going to know about it. A lot goes in Umar Nurmagomedov's favor here this weekend. Still riding with Corey.
I hope Corey wins, man. I mean, I'm a big Corey fan. You know, I try to put my bias aside when I make picks about fights, and there are plenty of times where I go, I think this guy's going to win, but I'm rooting for the other guy. You know, it happens all the time. I could see Corey winning this fight. It's not – he is definitely a live dog. If you're looking for, underdogs on this card, make a straight bet or something like that. I mean, Corey at plus 220 or 250, wherever he's coming in at, is a great bet. Top 5 perennial contender at bantamweight. It's kind of hard to count him out as that much of a dog. And like I said, if you're into props and methods, I think Corey by decision is an interesting bet if you're on that side.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'd really like to see Corey knock him out. I don't think it's going to happen, but Corey's right on the cusp. And if he loses, I'm going to be sad because he's another guy that's one fight away from a title shot, and I don't want to see him lose the shot to some Dagestani kid. Let's put a ball on this thing and do it as we always do with a pick rundown. All right, just to recap and run up the card one more time, I'm going to go with – still torn on that Jai Herbert-Rolando Bedoya fight, but I think I'm going to go with Jai Herbert. We didn't talk about it, but I'm going to go with Victoria Dudikova over Sam Hughes. Going with Shamil Gaziev over Dante Mays. Azamat Mirzakhanov over Alonzo Menafield. Elvis Brenner over Joel Alvarez. Lupita Godinez, Lupi over Mackenzie Dern. I'm taking Tony Ferguson over Michael Chiesa. Probably wrong. I'm going with Davison Figueiredo over Marlon Chito Ferra. I'm going with Sharabullah Magomedov over Mikhail Olajuchek. And I'm going with Corey Sandhagen over Umar Nurmagomedov. Just reading those off, I feel so wrong about them now, but we'll see. What do you got, Joe?
Hey, man, listen, you got to go with your gut with fighting, man. That's the one thing I've learned over the years, betting or just picking fights in general. You never want to go back on what you originally said because if that guy wins or if, flash KO happens, you're like, oh, man, I had this guy. He was my first pick, So there's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
I'll go through the whole card here quick because I do like some of these prelims that we didn't talk about. I got Cedricus Dumas winning this one. I got Jai Herbert winning as well. I got Dudikova over Sam Hughes. I think Garam wins. Live underdog with Garam as well. Fighting a UFC debuter on short notice for Vucenic as well. So I like Garam there. I think Shamil Gaziev wins a very gross decision. I like Fernandez against Muhammad Yahya. I got Azamat Mirzakhanov as well. I'm going with Joel Alvarez with a first or second round finish. I like Lupi Godinez by decision. I'm going with Michael Chiesa for a late arm triangle, third round arm triangle. I'm going with God of War, Davison Figueiredo by decision. I like Shara by TKO, and I'm going with Umar by decision.
All right, nice. Joe, thank you for being here. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time out of your – what day of the week is it? Thursday? Appreciate you taking some time out of your Thursday for being here. Appreciate everybody watching this at home. You can find us at PickinKeith. That's my personal Twitter, @_PickinFights on Instagram and Twitter. That's the main page for all of our stuff. Tom is over there at PickinFightsTom. You can also find us on Spotify for the full audio and video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And, if you jump in later on or if you're watching us live, jump in the chat next time. Spam us with comments. We love to respond. Joe, you got anything for us before we peace out?
Appreciate you having me, man, and thank you, Tom, for letting me step in. Hope I did a good job filling in. This is a really good card. Like I said, it's going to be better than some of the pay-per-view cards this year. So make sure you tune in. Make sure you set your alarm early, especially if you go out on Friday night. You want to catch these early prelims because there's some good fighters fighting early in the card, which you love to see. And I think we're going to see some stars be made and potentially see some retirements on Saturday. So. Tune in. Thank you guys for having me on, man. Appreciate the time, and hope to see you soon, brother.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Joe. Have a good vacation, Tom. See you soon, buddy.
Be good, Tom.